Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do now is we're going to have this panel on fixing democracy, digital problems and democracy. What are we going to do? Now, we've just had a coffee and we've been chatting about what we should do. So what we're thinking about doing is this. We're going to have a little opening. I'm going to ask the panelists to talk a little about what they think the problems are and what are potentially some of the solutions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try and do this interactive, because I think this is an issue on which a lot of people in the audience have views. A lot of people in the audience have got a lot of technical and specialist knowledge. So we're going to try and do that. Now, there is a problem, obviously. It is a bit dark in here, and I'm not sure if the microphones work. So basically, wave your hands about a bit, and if necessary, raise your voice. But we'll have a session to start with, as I say, just with the panelists, and then we'll open it to the floor. Because I think with this sort of subject, we'll get a much better result if we make it interactive. So I hope you're okay with that, and start thinking about your questions. Right, now turning to the panel. Okay, we have a great panel. A number of different experts from different views. And perhaps what I could do first, is if I could ask, Kirsty, you were talking earlier about the holistic approach to dealing with some of the problems thrown up by digital democracy. Perhaps you might like to start there.
Thank you. First of all, it is a great honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And as you pointed out, Alan, indeed, I do believe that the whole phenomena of mitigating into elections is a much wider phenomena. We tend in the West to describe the problem either from the cybersecurity angle or from the disinformation angle. But we have to look very thoroughly on how the main opponent, which I think we can at the moment say is the bear, Russia is defining the phenomena rather as an information confrontation from one side, and also active measures, a really phenomena that is holistic and combines of different elements. Digital part, electronic warfare, information operations, psychological operations, and part of that is definitely also usage of NGOs or usage of so-called election observers as front organizations for specific intelligence and security services. The mindset that is there in the Kremlin is today really based on that mindset. Therefore, we should also analyze it in a complex way.
Well, thanks. Great. Now, of course, Facebook has been at the center of a lot of controversy and debate, but also you've got a lot of the resources and the technical capacity to deal with a lot of these issues. So perhaps you'd like to a little focus on that, and perhaps then look at it a little more broadly as well as to what we can do.
I think that it's fair to say that for a few years we've learned a lot, and all that happened 2, 3, 4 years ago really underscored our responsibility to ensure the integrity of the elections when they happen in any single country in the world. We fully understand that provided the scale of our activity, it can have an impact on what people see, what people think, and at the end of the day, how people vote. And again, what is important here is really the integrity of the electoral process. And this is, I think, much broader than only talking about fake news or only talking about misinformation or about, I don't know, fake accounts. It's really an extremely complex puzzle. And the idea here is to have all the pieces of the puzzle so that we can be as close as possible to a positive situation. That said, and I'm very happy to develop on all the different aspects and layers after that, I also want to say, quoting Zuckerberg, that we have to understand that this is and unfortunately will be, a sort of an arms race. We will always have bad actors willing to misuse any tool, Facebook, the internet, to achieve their goals. Our goal as an important tech company is to have the right tools to fight with these guys. And whereas we often fight with these guys in a proactive way, trying to find beforehand what they want to do, we also must admit that it may happen that it's going to be reactive. Another aspect that is super important here is the need of cooperation. On one hand, we absolutely fully acknowledge all our responsibility in this debate. On the other hand, it is fair to say we will not win this battle on our own. And we do need cooperation. We do need cooperation with NGOs, with academics, but also, and maybe most importantly, with public administration. And here, I mean, there's already a lot of examples of very positive things that have been done in cooperation with. We discussed before we entered the panel all the things that happen in Estonia and the cooperation between the public administration, Cybersec administration, and Facebook to find out proactively what possibly may go wrong ahead of the March elections that Estonians had a few months ago. The initiatives that has been developed with the BSI, the German BSI, ahead of the federal elections in 17 is, I believe, also from a cybersecurity perspective, a wonderful example of the so much needed cooperation that we all want to ensure the integrity of the elections and to ensure a trustful democratic process.
That's very helpful, and illustrates the kind of the broad nature of the threat we face. So, Clara, one of the things you said earlier was that, if you like, the underplayed game in here is actually just what we could do ourselves, and digital hygiene strategies as well. So perhaps you might like to look at some of those issues.
Yeah, thank you. I think the previous two speakers kind of talk about, there are so many different layers. So I kind of will start with the lowest layer or the lowest common denominator, which is cyber hygiene. And what I've observed that, in the past couple of years, we focus a lot on the disinformation. The governments have focused a lot of their efforts on securing their election infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But when I think about the whole ecosystem of individuals around the elections, that's where really cyber hygiene comes into play. If you look at the news and if you look at the most medialized or mediatized election intrusion efforts or successes, they all started with an intrusion. They all started with a hacked email account. They all started with, spoofed email address. They all started with a phishing email. So I think while we have done a lot to explore these other layers around, attempts to undermine elections, I think that we still have to look at the link between cyber hygiene and, protecting the democracy and protecting the elections. We talked a little bit about the active measures. I mean, what active measures are that your adversary finds your one weakness and then goes and exploits it. That happens with disinformation, but that also happens in cybersecurity. So your adversary, in this case, we often talk about nation-state adversaries. They're well-resourced, they're stealthy, they have, financial, technical, and other resources to get to you, but they're also opportunistic, which means they will go to that one little place you have forgotten, your little patch, your email, your weak email. And because the election, ecosystem is a decentralized system, they will go, to the candidates, they will go to the political parties and hit you with your, unpatched system. I think when we talk about cyber hygiene, what has to happen for it to really help the ecosystem, it has to be scalable. Mm-hmm. And you really have to think about who are the vulnerable individuals in that ecosystem. I'll stop here. There are some other things I'd like to maybe discuss at a later stage. But yeah, as we talked about, we've done a lot around disinformation. We've done a lot around election infrastructure. There is a lot to think about. cyber hygiene, how that helps the electoral processes, and I think the governments and all the actors kind of should be thinking about who are the organizations that can scale the solutions to deploy cyber hygiene at scale.
That's very good. And I think there's a lot more to talk about on that subject, as you say. And it is actually the thing which is often simply overlooked. And I suppose one of the elements of it is actually a level of cyber hygiene education, so that a lot of actors understand what it is and understand what they have to do to protect themselves as well. Now, protecting, of course, the nation is another matter entirely. And I think there are a whole number of issues which we could address here, but perhaps starting with the extent to which the digital platforms themselves are able to be cooperative when you've got a general election upcoming, and the extent to which to other member states do you get know-how, intelligence on how that it works. Is that effective? I mean, presumably, given the Brits are now facing an election on December the 9th, 10th or 12th, if they can ever make a mind up, they will presumably be facing the same sort of things. And do they call on you and other member state agencies in different member states for intel, and how does that work? That's probably where we might start, perhaps.
Sorry, so you missed now your command, whatever. So, then very easy. So for example, I think the cooperation between the European member states is very close. When I'm looking to France, for example, as one of the natural partner, we are working very close together regarding who is doing what on the election campaigns, also on the European elections, and if we thought there's something or not. Same with the UK. And we have a very close operative cooperation. For example, in 3 weeks I had been there at the employee session with the NCSC together to give as the natural partner speech and discuss with the employees. So in Germany, because it had been just raised during the German federal elections in 2017, we had different kind of pillars. And you're right, it had been a very holistic approach on the one hand, and it had been something together with cyber hygiene, because I think these all are different kind of elements which have to put together in a big puzzle. So what we have been doing is, on the one hand, is that we, of course, hardened our system. So if you're electing and you're transmitting the results of the election of the different regions, that this is secure. This is number one, very easy, or seems to be quite easy. Then number two, discuss with the different candidates. How are they going to secure their accounts, their social media accounts? There it is very important to discuss in very close cooperation with Facebook and the other guys there. This worked very well with two-factor authentication and so on. Then number three is, and I think there we are still in a learning curve, regarding freedom of speech on the one hand, compared of fake news. So from the one perspective, you just raised Brexit. If a bus is running around in London with different kind of figures on it, is it fake or is it real? I think currently there's a lawsuit ongoing in London about it with some prominent members. So I don't know, and how are we going to deal with it? So, and I think this is one of the core issues we have to identify. When we're speaking about other nations, and honestly, I think Russia is very important, but we should focus not on Russia. We should say we want to make a voting and a democracy as strong against all the dangers we have around. From where it's coming, I don't care, as long as they are not making a goal. And there I think it is very important for us to understand if we are getting technical indicators to identify if someone is trying to influence them or not. And then our feeling is that alone looking on technical indicators is much too little. So we need a combination on a technical side, technical indicators compared with real brains. And that's what we are currently developing. And this is really a challenge. And I think if someone says he can do it all on his own, he will fail from my perspective. We need a very close network and we need a very close cooperation. And that's exactly what we are doing also with the other information security agencies within Europe.
That's great. And I think this is what's important is that we talk about Russia, but actually, given the capacity of the platforms to be misused, the Russians may have started it, but it could be just anybody from other hostile powers to organized crime, to all sorts of things. I mean, it's not just our friends further east. What I'd like to do now is open to questions from the floor. Now, as I said, it's a little tricky because it's a tad dark in here, but we'll see if we can do this. Righty, okay. If you could just say your name and institution and then your question. Well, okay, just speak.
I'll try to speak loud. From the Warsaw University of Technology. But I would like to come back to the subject of Brexit. Because we talk about external influence on democracy, on digital democracy. But I would like to go back a few days to the comment made by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who said that there is a big problem in the digital world with politicians, including the ones at the very top, fueling hate within society. And I think this is also a big problem, because if, let's say, in the upcoming elections in Britain, there is a risk that this fueling of hate in the digital world by internal internal actors will also create a problem with democracy, with elections, with maybe crimes. This goes parallel to the figures published by the Crown Prosecution Service, who say that they think that the 10% rise in the past year of hate crimes in Britain has been a lot of has been fueled by hate within the internet, within the digital world. So I think that we also should touch upon the problems that lie within, not with the external players. Thank you.
That's very interesting. So does anyone want to, did you get that? Yeah. Does anyone want to look at taking that point about what we do about the, not the external, if you like, hate actors, but the internal hate actors who are using the internet and the platforms to project?
Yeah, just very quickly. In Germany, we are having a law that if we say that someone is doing a hate speech or doing something like that, it had to be taken out within a certain amount of time by the social media companies. And this is very important, by the social media companies. What I think is even more important is hate is just the end of a further kind of, let's say, career you are doing within the internet. And I think there's something where we need to have some kind of, let's say, defense measures, early defense measures. Today, when I'm reading a newspaper, the editor of a printed newspaper, so then the editor is doing a kind, let's say, of what is important, what is not important for me. When I'm looking for the same news services, Google Alerts and so on, or Facebook, it is, what do I like? And these are the news I'm getting. So if I'm a conservative guy, I will get all the information regarding conservatism and how good it is. If I'm a leftist guy, I will get everything. And who is now, let's say, bringing it back to the table? In former times, in the real world, we went out to a pub, sitting at a table, and if you have drunk one beer too much and said something stupid, the other guys would say, hey, this is not correct, stop it. Today you are getting applause within the internet. And I think this is something we have to change. And this is something from the government side, not to finger point to the social media companies, but to support them that they are going to change it.
Yeah, I'll just add something to it. Social media platforms, I'll put that issue aside, but I think there is a huge responsibility on the part of journalists, and it's just to reinforce this point, to do their research, not to amplify the news, not to amplify the scandalous statements, or not to amplify something that has not been verified. The quality of journalism went completely just down the drain in the last couple of years, because we've completely changed the business model of what journalism is, and I think journalists have abandoned apologies for generalizing. I know there are those really honest ones out there who do their work. But I mean, there is a huge responsibility on the part of what we call still journalists or media outlets to actually do their work and be there to explain and educate the society. I'm not saying they have to be the arbiter of what's right or wrong, but they have the responsibility to present the facts. And disinformation and the weaponization of information and a selective display of information, and you can actually do a lot around it with facts.
Right, so a few comments on my side. Maybe first of all about this comment with relation to external versus internal threats. I fully agree. I think the important is the will to mislead the users, the will to mislead the citizens, and it's not really important whether it comes from inside or outside the country. Of course, there is yet another additional aspect if you have like targeted things coming from abroad, but still, if a misleading action is undertaken from inside the country, it is as much as an issue as if it was coming from any country outside. And this is really how we approach the thing. About the hate speech approach, well, on one hand, the first thing to say, I guess, is that the goal of Facebook is to give people a voice, and from this perspective, freedom of speech is at the cornerstone of such a tool. But obviously, it is always key to find the right balance between, on one hand, the safety of the users, and on the other hand, the freedom of speech. And whereas I guess in 99% of anything that you see on Facebook, we will all agree on the fact that it should or should not be on the platform, the problem is the last little piece of content on which someone may not agree, provided how big Facebook is. This little piece in terms of percentage is still super huge, right? And well, from this perspective, we do have our community standards that say in a very clear way what can be or cannot be said on Facebook. And very often, these community standards are more strict than regulation in the countries. And just to add on this and to show you how this topic is really a complicated topic. The reality today is that in some countries, most of policymakers would come to us and say, okay, guys, you're doing a good job, but you don't remove enough, or you don't remove fast enough. In some other countries, though, they would come to us and say, yeah, guys, you're doing a good job, but you remove too much. You're a censor. And we're like in between, right? And that's why also we say in a very open way, and this is a post from Zuckerberg for a few months ago, there are a lot of fields where more cooperation between, again, public administration and the tech companies is super needed. I don't know if the word regulation is the right one. It has to be future-proof. It has to be adapted to these digital tools. And sometimes when I hear regulation, I'm like, okay, we're back in the 20th century. But maybe, whatever. It's still like, it is really an extremely complex topic. And on the last point about this digital bubble, I get the argument, but I always have some sort of a problem with it. As I'm just trying to compare what was the access to information for an average citizen, I don't know, let's say 30, 40 years ago, before we had the internet. So in most of the countries, and let's talk about, let's say, I don't know, democratic countries, Western Europe, let's not talk about Poland, where you had communism, so it was different anyway. But so in most of democratic countries before the internet, you had like, I don't know, 2-3 TV stations in your home. Most frequently, that's how the society was back then. The father of the family was bringing one newspaper to its family, and it was the newspaper that was most frequently reflecting its political views. And this is where the whole kind of spectrum of information ended. Today, with Facebook and with the internet, you do have an access to an extremely broad panel of political views to an extremely broad panel of media outlets from your country and from abroad. So potentially, it's not like there is a bubble. Potentially, there is a much bigger possibility to have access to different sorts of content, different sorts of opinion. And of course, that in your newsfeed, you will mostly see things that your friends like, and most of your friends like things that you like. And so here comes the bubble. But still, I guess that you do have some friends that maybe have some different opinions than you have, and so there may be some opening. And then, most importantly, I think that we're back to the topic of media literacy. The tool is here to have an extremely open access to different kind of content. Now the question is there a will of the user? Is there a will of the citizen to open itself to an extremely broadened panel of content? I think this is an also super important question, and this kind of media literacy aspect is a key one. We can create the best tools ever if there is no, if the users are not inspired to open up to different views, then indeed the bubble will remain, but just as it was existing in the past.
Thank you. I will also reflect on what you were saying. I totally agree that coming now down to the lowest level, to the basic level, is really the importance of education and the importance of also teachers, and specifically history and civics teachers. I think that they should be part of the discussion, and spreading the critical thinking already as to a lower grade students as possible. That should be also one of the aims. And definitely freedom of speech is also our strength, and we should think about how to use that strength in a context of time. Usually democratic processes are, the time is the weakness, that we are too slow. This is sometimes criticized in our context, but I think that freedom of speech gives the governments, the private sectors, all have the possibility quickly react to what has happened and to counter the narratives, to counter the polarization of society as well. Just trustworthy sources are more available as well. Thank you.
It's very important. Okay, let's go back to the audience. Do we have, I see somebody waving their hands up there. Okay, can you, again, name, institution, and question, please, and speak loudly.
Yes, international law at the University here next door.
We have a microphone. Better.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Przemysław Roguski. I'm teaching international law at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and I would like to ask a question about troll farms, specifically the use of amplification techniques through social media by troll farms by all parties of the political spectrum. So we see this both from an outside perspective by outside actors, as well as from an inside perspective from political parties, interest groups, pressure groups, and so forth. So my question would be, is this not a useful angle for regulation, not only self-regulation by the social media companies like Twitter or Facebook, but also for regulation on a national and European level? And I would just like to hear some views from the panel on this particular problem. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question, because, of course, one of the arguments is with troll farms is that we're not actually dealing with free speech. This is actually manufactured speech. So, anyhow, over to the panel. Did anyone want to start? Jacob? No?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with this one. Yeah, so one super important aspect of all our safety-related policies is what we call the real name policy. What I mean by that is that unlike on Twitter, when you are on Facebook, you are supposed to, I insist on the supposed to, be present with your real first name and your real last name. One of the reasons why we believe this policy is so important is because we have seen that very frequently all the misinformation and fake news, they come by the mean of fake profiles or by the mean of pages that are administrated by fake profiles. So this policy has always existed. However, in the past, it was pretty much reactive, right? You had to contact us and say that you think that John Smith is not John Smith, then we could check if John Smith is indeed John Smith or not, and if not, we remove the profile. Today, this is really a field where you see that AI and machine learning is helping us really heavily. What I mean by that is that today we proactively remove millions of fake accounts and so troll farms or potential troll farms every single day. Do we have it right? Well, we don't have it 100% right, I guess. However, this is really a very good example of how technology can help us. Technology and policies, the only fact that you have to be present on the platform with your real name, can help us in indeed fighting this this phenomenon. On the regulation piece, I don't know. Whereas I do think that there is really a lot of fields where better cooperation between regulators, public administration, and tech companies is needed. On this one, I think we all agree that this is not something that we want. Then the question is, how can we create the most efficient technical tools to fight with the phenomenon?
That's great. Does anyone want to follow up? Ani?
You know, it's always a question. It's good that they're working on this one, but the big question is it enough? And this, and I think it's that's the most important issue, to identify the troll farms. If they are done by AI or machine learning, it's quite easy, much easier. If it is people, when is it becoming freedom of speech, and when is it part of the real troll farm? And when is it paid marketing and advertisement? So I think this is something, it will be extremely difficult to regulate if it is people really staying behind it. And I think this is something, therefore, I'm more in favoring regarding the way what you have said, that say try to do it, because it's core of your business principle, should be. And then we will have to investigate if this is enough. Otherwise, we will have to take it last line of defense, regulative measures.
Does anyone else want to pick up on the troll farms issue? Kirsty, okay.
Just perhaps a quick comment. In Brussels environment, I spent 4 years, and there we had a European Commission Code of Practice against disinformation being put in place. And that was rather a collaborative effort. It was not meant to be a regulation, because one of the main things was that content cannot be regulated, of course. But what can be done is indeed, as we have mentioned already several times, just a cooperation between the private sector, the government, and here as an example, I can give from Estonia. Before our parliamentary elections, we had 2 cases. One of them was that the investigative journalist was found out that there are Facebook accounts that are putting and spreading information, hashtags like Estonia, exit EU, etc. And in reality, there were no concrete persons behind. Even the journalist contacted the schools and asked around whether people were studying there. No traces were found. And then Facebook was contacted, and these accounts were removed. But at the same time, there was another case where Facebook accounts were affiliated with one of the Estonian political parties, which is also sometimes emphasizing the hate speech. And those investigations showed that there is no real persons are behind, and then the accounts were kept.
Does anyone, any observation?
Yeah, now I will take my Global Cyber Alliance hat off and I'll put my Atlantic Council fellow hat on for a second. You know, I mean, there's been really, really amazing initiative done by researchers where they do training and awareness on how to spot a bot, you know, and how do you actually, you know, look at some of this, you know, unauthentic behavior. How do you actually do your own investigative journalism as a person or you know, journalists can use these tools or media outlets. So there is a lot actually out there done by, you know, researchers and, you know, using open source information that actually can be used as a resource by the communities. You know, there's a lot of collaborative partnerships, including between Facebook and the Atlantic Council Digital Research Forensic Lab. There we go. So there is a lot out there. I think it's about awareness and it's about willingness to look at the resources that are available.
Thank you very much. It's a really comprehensive view on the question. Okay, anybody else got any questions? We're looking for another question. Do not be shy. Ah, yes, I see somebody over here. Again, name, institution, just wait for the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Diegel. I work in the European Parliament. I have two questions, but it's the same topic. So the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of speech called for a moratorium on the trade of cyber surveillance recently. And at the same time, California passed a law that would forbid the use of facial recognition software in its law enforcement. Yet we're still exporting all of this technology to all kinds of authoritarian regimes. And my question would be to the panel, maybe a broader question, how do you combine globalization and, well, how to fix democracies?
That's a good question. Okay. Anyone wants to take that first? Pause on the panel. Okay, Jacob.
Yeah, maybe. So, of course, your question is fascinating, but also extremely broad. We could discuss it hours and hours. But I do think that we do need to have some clear common values, such as, for instance, freedom of speech, as a starting point. And I fully acknowledge the fact that freedom of speech should not be like total, and there are, safety and other aspects to also be taken into account. But what I mean by that is that a few years ago, the 10 first tech companies in the world were American companies. A pity not European, but American still. Today, I think half of them, or even 6 of them, are Chinese. And I can tell you that these guys, they just don't ask themselves these kind of questions. When this application TikTok has been asked, like, how do they react to political speech or stuff? The answer was, well, we don't want any political speech on TikTok. And that's their approach to freedom of speech. So, yeah, just an example to say that we need to have some very strong common values and then all work together on the implementation of these values, appreciating the fact that it may be sometimes extremely complex from a technical perspective and from where to put the balance perspective. But yeah, the kind of common ground is absolutely key here.
Okay. Anybody else has got a... No? Okay.
I can also comment on emphasizing exactly what my colleague was saying here, that there is a difference between authoritarian regimes and democratic societies. Mm-hmm. From one side, there's a freedom of speech, balance of powers, etc. From the other side, it's not. And the authoritarian regimes, they are very widely exporting their technological solutions. The cities, smart cities, export projects, for example, from China, which include the surveillance tactics, etc., and possibilities. But democratic, within the democratic societies, the surveillance is done according to the law. And there are specific laws, court systems, and it's not getting out of the end as it is in the authoritarian system.
Thank you. Yes, that was a very interesting question and a nice response from the panel. Let me just see. I'm sure we've got a couple more questions. Can I see anybody in the darkness? Yes, gentleman down here. Again, name, institution, and question.
Hello, Rastianota, National Cybersecurity Center, Slovakia. Question to the previous discussion about fake accounts. My question is, why we are dealing so much with fake accounts? For me, it's like catching raindrops by hands. It might help with that specific raindrop one, but it will not really prevent us from being dry because of rain. Why? Is this a way which might help us with the real problem we have?
Okay. Perhaps to you, Jacob, that sounds. Okay.
No, but I fully agree. I mean, the fight against fake accounts is only one little piece of a much broader puzzle. It is still a piece of the puzzle, though, so we have to do it. But yes, the fact, even if we were able to fight all the fake accounts that do exist on the internet, it doesn't mean that the battle would have been won. And I mean, yeah, then you have the broader the broader topic of fake news, of misinformation, of again hate speech or harmful speech. But what we have seen, though, is that a lot of these come from fake accounts. So fighting the fake accounts is not the only, but a quite strong tool to achieve our goals here.
And do you want anybody else want to have a comment? No? Okay. Right. Next question. Do I see a hand waving somewhere? It's difficult in the darkness. Okay. I see. Yes. Yes. You see him before me. Yeah. Yeah. So name, question, name, institution, and question.
Karol Czcionka, Display Link Poland. I have a question more technically because the technology so-called deepfake is developed. And I have a question, how do you imagine fighting with it to prevent from spread the deepfakes with, for example, video that politic said something that didn't say, and so on.
Deepfakes? Anybody want to try and run with that? Okay, Clara.
I'll just give you a non-technical answer, which actually goes to the point I mentioned. You know, the journalist, the social media platform, you know, the other channels through which something like that would be propagated do have a responsibility. You know, the journalists not to amplify a message they haven't verified. You know, and same for the social media platform. So for me, the answer is not technical. For me, the answer is to go to looking critically at the information that's being presented to you, asking yourself, why is this information being presented to you? And then, you know, act accordingly and spread the information accordingly.
Yeah, so obviously I fully agree with what has just been said. I will just add that it is, of course, a potential big challenge ahead of us. We already assessing it, and not on our own. Yesterday I read the information that we cooperate with Microsoft on this topic, so I think that there is a broad acknowledgement of the whole tech society or community that this is something we have to look at. Do we have the 100% answer to this new challenge? No, not yet, but we definitely investigated it very closely.
Yeah, and actually I might have something technical to it. So I know there's a couple of companies in the United States who are looking at using blockchain technology to verify the source of the video and kind of create a trail, you know, that goes back to the original video that could show us or could be a proof that this has been doctored or not.
Anyone else got a comment? No? Okay, right. One last question. Can I see anybody's hands waving in the audience? Okay, gentlemen, down here. So, name, institution, and question.
Hi there, my name is Ivan Belastenko. I'm an Israeli correspondent for Ishpot TV. I've got a question for the panel here. You're talking about fixing digital democracy. I'm just curious how you plan to fix democracy if Facebook and I'm sure some of the other organizations are not prepared to denounce things that Communist Chinese and their Communist Party is doing. So how are you planning to fix democracy if you're not able to fight the biggest threat to democracy, the Communist Chinese?
Okay, controversial. Anybody want to take that? I suppose it's sort of directed to towards Facebook. I don't know, Jacob, what do you think?
I'm not sure I got the question 100%, but again, how tech companies from other countries, like for instance China, behave. Is there a problem? What we see and what we know is that we definitely do not have the same ground values again, and this is why we do have a totally different approach to the investments, the tools, and the team that we allocate to ensure, the democracy and the integrity of the elections. So there's really, in terms of philosophical approach, a huge difference between companies such as Facebook and some new big Chinese players.
Sorry, just to add here, I wasn't referring to a specific company in China. I'm referring to the Communist Chinese Party and their pressures on various companies and on governments. Are you guys ready to face that pressure if China calls and calls for something to be done?
We're fine with it. We're not present in China, and there are reasons for this.
Yeah, but China is present over here.
We don't have any business in China, so and what I mean really, if we are not present in China, is because in terms of the basic values of what we believe in, there is not enough common ground for us to be present there.
Arne.
Very quickly regarding the Communist Party. I mean, this is an entirely different form regarding, I don't know if you like to name it democracy or not, whatever it is at least not a Western democracy. This is probably something we can agree. But also more in the East, it's also not a Western democracy. So the core is, what are our values, what are we staying for, and do we have secret services and so on, which are giving us early warning calls if something is going to happen. And there, I think, on the government side at least, we are having very clear sensors if something is going on and what is going on there. And then, yes, we are speaking also with companies and with other, let's say, business people if they are going into a difficult situation. Let's put it that way. But besides that, you know that, for example, is Germany having as much exporting to China than to the US? Are we going to halve our exports because we dislike someone or we like someone? So I think this is something where we should have a very clear view, how are we going to organize our economic system in the future? And this is besides democracy, it is democracy and the right business solution.
Yes, that's a comprehensive answer. Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes now, so I think we've got about 30 seconds, and I want to ask the panel is, as a concluding comment, one idea to fix digital democracy. So perhaps I'll start with Kirsty.
So I don't think that the democracy needs to be fixed. I think we should simply use the strengths of diplomacy. Or sorry, not diplomacy, but democracy. So freedom of speech in the context of time, as I mentioned before, that I think our governments, private sector should be quicker in responding to disinformation, quicker in responding to cyber attacks, and quicker in responding to hybrid all
That's great.
over.
Jacob, 30 seconds, or probably even less than 30 seconds.
So as we already mentioned several times, I don't think there is like one solution to answer the problem. However, there is one aspect we did not really talk about today is how transparently the users, and so the citizens, get the content that they get on the platform. And from this perspective, I think that's one very important aspect that has been implemented in Europe ahead of the EU elections is the full transparency with relation to political ads. Now, every user that gets a political or issue ad knows who's paying, how it's targeted, what's the budget, and so on and so on. And of course, we've been asking ourselves the question, but maybe we should, not allow political ads. But we do want political ads to be on the platform because it is a huge part of the kind of freedom of speech approach. But users have to know why they get the content they get.
Great. Okay, Clara.
So I'll try to do it in 3 seconds. So, for me, it's really exploring the connection and a role of cyber hygiene in protecting electoral processes, but democracy more broadly. How do you protect your whole election ecosystem at scale? How do you protect your journalists? How can they protect their sources? This all kind of comes together. Your social media accounts. So, how do you use what you already have available at scale to protect your whole ecosystem?
Great. Finally, the last comment, Arnie.
Just do everything what we have discussed today in the panel.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the panel. Can we just give our appreciation in a normal manner? Thank you very much.